All right, folks, I'll try to give this a shot here. I got about 10 slides, so hopefully this won't take too long. I did meet both commissioners last night, but again, my name's Keith Fisk. I'm the administrator of the Wildlife Damage Program here for our agency, and most of you folks recall last year we took a little bit of a experimental approach to our overabundant Canada goose population and the damage that they cause in eastern South Dakota. And I'm just going to talk real briefly about what our plans are for moving forward this spring. So just to get started here, a little bit of information for those new commissioners. On this graph here, on the left axis, I have what our Spring Canada Goose population index is, which is given to us by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service each spring. And then on the right axis are the number of requests for service, or the number of areas that we work on with landowners in eastern South Dakota. As you can see right there, last year we had about 250,000 Canada geese in South Dakota, and our management plan objective, which we completed in 2010, establishes that goal right around 80 to 90,000 birds. So clearly we're above our management objective. So what is Canada goose damage for some of you folks that may be unfamiliar? It's obviously real. You know, you hear a lot of sides that, oh, those birds don't cause that much damage, or yeah, they do. And I'm here to tell you that once Canada geese get into crop fields, soybeans and corn specifically, they can cause significant amounts of damage, and it's a significant source of conflict between wildlife and landowners here in South Dakota. Whoops. Another shot here. These birds can go into these areas, and the average amount of damage based off of research that we've previously conducted is anywhere between 3 to 5 acres, with about the average being around 3. Some landowners may have one area that's damaged, some may have 10. So you can see with today's commodity prices and some of those things that it is a financial impact to many of these producers in eastern South Dakota. Here's one last slide. The geese were able to feed in this area, and this was a little exclusion, and again you can see the tremendous amount of damage that those birds really do. One last slide here. Since 2000, as that Canada goose population has increased, our agency has spent over $4.8 million addressing those complaints and cooperatively working with landowners, again in eastern South Dakota. Last year, worked with around 350 individuals, addressed 700 requests for service, and you can see where those areas are focused, kind of the hotbeds up there in Day County and Clark, and then down in the southeast, kind of the three-corner area of Kingsbury Lake and Brookings. And then of course here and further west, you know, 5 years ago, we never saw Canada goose work over in that area. And as that population has continued to climb, we've seen row crops expand further to the west there. We've really started to see more and more work and more conflict between Canada geese and landowners the further west we go. So that's one thing we're kind of hoping to keep an eye on here in the very near future. So currently, obviously, our population exceeds our management goals. Again, low landowner tolerance, again, because of the record high commodity prices the last few years, as well as the row crop expansion. Our agency's been very proactive in trying to get a handle on this population. You, the commission, have approved liberal bag limits and season dates for August management take. That's a goose season that occurs during the month of August. The early September season, and then last year we were fortunate to get approval from the Fish and Wildlife Service to increase the bag limit during the regular season. So again, really trying to maximize hunter harvest and try to get that population under control. For about 4 years, we've also been sub-permitting. We receive a permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service, which allows our agency to lethally take birds during the growing season to reduce that damage. We've been working with landowners now for 4 years to hopefully engage those folks to a little higher level to have those folks help us out. And then last year, we tried an experimental approach, and I'm just going to refer to it as the Spring Canada Goose program. And what that program is we utilize volunteers during the month of April to try to help us harvest some geese and haze these birds away from these identified problem areas. And last year, if you folks recall, had probably had one of the latest springs on record. We also had some real harsh conditions, so it was real hard for volunteers to get out and get access to these birds. Sioux Falls also experienced that real late ice storm, and a lot of folks, we heard from comments, they couldn't get out to try to work on this project because they were bound with damage to their homes or vehicles, some of those types of things. But nonetheless, we did harvest 820 Canada geese last year. And again, because of the late spring last year, some folks did have a concern that with all these migrant geese in the area that we might harvest some migrant geese and kind of negate the focus of this program. So we actually made an effort where we weighed, I think we weighed almost 90% of the birds that were harvested. And clearly 94% of those birds were resident birds. So we're going to be doing that again this year, but for the most part, I'm real comfortable that we're not going to see a high percentage of migrant geese taken at all, and really focusing on those local birds. So again, as I said, this is a authorized activity under the Fish and Wildlife Service permit. For this spring, we're going to authorize, we're going to, authorize to take 7,000 Canada geese, and basically we're going to allow 280 volunteer hunters to assist us with that. Those folks are going to have a 25 bird per limit, so they could shoot 25 birds the first day if they were lucky enough, or the idea is to hopefully spread that out through the month of April. And since this isn't a traditional hunting season, obviously the use of some of those traditional methods such as blinds, calls, decoys, those things aren't allowable underneath that permit. So folks are pretty much limited to pass shooting or jump shooting. And again, since this is a provision of the permit, all these birds are going to be donated to the Sportsmen Against Hunger program. And I've been working real closely with those folks and really appreciate their cooperation. But we've got 5 different processors scattered across eastern South Dakota, so it's really easy for those volunteers to go ahead and drop those birds off to that organization. And then of course there's many other permit provisions. Again, we have basically, it's a full page the folks need to really read, and our staff explain what exactly you can and can't do, so it's pretty thorough. It's going to run this year from April 1 to April 30th, again focused on those areas that have a history of crop damage. Our staff went ahead and contacted landowners that had a history of damage, and right now in 7 counties in eastern South Dakota, we've got over 100,000 acres of land that have been private land that's been enrolled by cooperating landowners. So that's a significant amount of acres out there, and really demonstrates that these landowners are willing to cooperate with us and the sportsmen to hopefully get a better handle on this issue here come this spring. We just finished up our registration period, which was online, had more than 800 people apply for those 280 spots, so a lot of interest from the sportsmen on that end as well. So what are some of the objectives of this program? Like I had said, we authorized the take of 7,000 birds. We know we're not going to take all 7,000 of those geese. If we could get 50% success or 3,000 some birds scattered out on these areas, I would be really happy with that, because again, it's not only the activity of physically taking those birds, but it's also being able to haze those geese away from those areas before they set up shop to nest in those areas. And we could be hazing some of those birds 10 miles to the north, or hopefully we're hazing those birds further north so we don't have those birds around to have eggs or lay eggs and have young in the spring. And then of course it is going to reduce our population at a very, very local level. In the grand scheme of things, you're not going to be able to see a difference there, but on these individual properties we're sure hopeful that we will. And of course after hopefully we have a cooperative spring versus last year, and we have much better harvest and hunter participation. We're going to take a real hard look at that then, not only from the standpoint of the birds that were harvested, but also what we saw on those areas as far as was it necessary for our staff to go out there? if they did, what exactly tools or techniques they had to employ on those areas, and try to gauge that success. And we'd have a better idea of that probably after those birds have molted their feathers and then grown their new feathers and are able to fly. So I'm guessing around August we'll be able to really evaluate and see if this program was a success. So with that, we had a gentleman here yesterday that testified about all these geese that are in town, and I've been watching that corn pile since about December, and it was quite a bit higher. And he's right, every night you see a tremendous amount of birds fly in there, and I was down there watching those birds with my daughter one night, and I took a picture, but hopefully you can see there's a lot of birds that use that corn. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments from folks.
Questions, comments for Keith? Keith, how long is this program, spring program, made available? Is it there, or testing it, or piloting it, or some type of monitoring, some type of evaluation?
Sure. My response to that would be, last year was our first, I'm going to call it experimental approach. Because we had such harsh winter or harsh spring and delayed conditions, we really couldn't evaluate whether it was successful or not. So we talked about it internally with a lot of different staff, kind of put our heads together and decided, is this something that we want to try again this year, or did we have our fill last year? And everyone felt for the most part that, to really evaluate this tool, let's give it another go. Let's see what would happen if we had conducive weather and some of those things. So, I would say this year is either gonna make it a success, or we're not gonna continue it on into the future. So.
Thanks, Keith.